And I thank you for joining us today. And I feel great. I just finished my third big heaping cup of coffee this morning. I got up today and I was a little remiss in making coffee at home, and I came to work where it's free in the first place. So I was drinking it by well, what do they call it on the Coneheads? Mass quantities. The reason I was doing that is I got home a little late last night. I was up past my bedtime. First of all, I went to the Twin Falls County Republican Committee meeting that was over at County West last night. Started at 7 o'clock, and they had the reorganizational meeting. They do this every couple of years, just within a week of the state primary. They have a 9-day window to do that. So last night was the reorganizational meeting. Wasn't a long meeting in that sense, maybe 45, 50 minutes. But the reason I was there, and word will get around, is because I had been approached and asked if I would like to be an alternate delegate to the state convention, which is coming up the first weekend in June. Well, starting next Thursday, actually, in Nampa. And I gave it some thought, and I said, I think I'd like to do that because considering the rock throwing event they had a couple of years ago, I'd like to be in the center of all of this if it happens again. And so I went last night. As it turns out, they've elevated my name up to the regular delegate list. So I'm on, they have a delegate list and an alternate delegate list, and there's all these elected people, and then there's me. Uh, which means a lot of those people will have to behave themselves while they're there for that weekend. But by acclamation, apparently, we all got approved. And so I will be attending the convention as a delegate. I've been to these types of conventions before, but usually just on the other side. I remember at one time going to one of these state Republican conventions in a place far, far away, and I actually ran into Bernard Carrick, the former New York City Police Commissioner, and I got to spend about 20 minutes just chatting with him. Really nice guy, and then, of course, he ran afoul of the law. Uh, not on anything what I would call, serious. It's not like they were covering things up in the White House like they did back in the 1990s. We'll talk about that a little later in the show, too. So I left the meeting, driving home, and I had to run into Walgreens for a couple of minutes. And then leaving Walgreens, I got home, and, now you're wide awake because you're up past your normal bedtime. And so I sat down, I turned on the television, and I watched the Sharks Blues hockey game because Joe Thornton, I think in Ireland that would be pronounced Joe Thornton, Joe Thornton has been playing in the NHL for about 20 years now. Most of the last decade was San Jose, and he's never gotten close to the Stanley Cup Finals. And last night his team won, and he seems to be a really good guy, and he's been one of the better players over the last 20 years. This is his first real opportunity to. So I watched the entire game and finally got to bed a little bit late last night. And then a little after 3 o'clock this morning. One of the great things about having a cat is you don't need a regular alarm clock. The hour about 3 o'clock rolls around, and Tucker, he's my big black and white cat, generally is there to wake me up as quickly as he can because it's breakfast time. And once you're up, you can't go back to bed, even on weekends, because then he expects you're going to play. He also, when I was trying to take a nap yesterday afternoon, decided that we should play instead, and so I didn't get well, I didn't get enough sleep in the afternoon to prepare for last night. So, as I say, everything today is just simply fueled by caffeine. 10 minutes after 8 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 53. And I've got to mention this very quickly off the top of the show. I read this yesterday. It was on the AP Wire yesterday, and then Benito posted it to our website, newsradio1310.com. And I was looking at the story again this morning. There is an effort underway to turn the craters of the moon into a national park here in Idaho. And the argument goes, well, we need a national park here exclusively in Idaho because it'll bring in tourists. Well, don't people already come in to see craters of the moon? Well, yeah, but if it was a national park, you see, no. Why do we need to have a national park? I bring this up because this current National Park Service Director, Jonathan Jarvis, this is from the Associated Press, is the former superintendent for Craters of the Moon. Jarvis says people have been talking about trying to get national park status for decades. Idaho gets nearly $29 million in estimated annual economic benefits from its national historic sites and monuments, including Craters of the Moon. So, if we suddenly have it administered by the federal government, we're going to have more people coming here. Is that what they're telling us? What happens when the federal government comes into the neighborhood and says, all right, we're planting the flag. This is now our territory? Well, then the federal government starts saying, there's a development over there not too far away within a few miles of our national park, and Gee Willikers, there might be some runoff from that development, and gee, there's a couple of ranches over there. We noticed they've been using a lot of fertilizer, and gee Willikers, we noticed there's a couple of airplanes flying by because there's an airstrip near here. Maybe that airstrip has to go too. When you take Caesar's coin, we've talked about this before. When you take Caesar's coin, you end up having to follow Caesar's orders. This is just another way for the federal government to get its tentacles into the state of Idaho. And some people say, oh, but we need the tourism. It's already there. I mean, it's you go all over the country. People know where Craters of the Moon happens to be. Why do you need it on a list of national parks? 736-0300, 736-0300. You're up next, and you're on the air.
Thank you. I agree with you. We don't need any more national parks in Idaho, and we don't need any more monuments. As far as I'm concerned, it's just more federal control. We need less federal control.
And again, you're looking at a 2.5 million acre parcel just across the line from Owyhee County in Oregon, where they want to turn it into a national monument, which will mean it'll be pretty much off limits to ranchers and hikers and any human beings in the area. How much more of this land can they take from us?
Not only that, is that it's not just where the national park is or the monument is. It's the area around it too. And I'm not I can't quote the numbers of that area around it, but there is control around those monuments, like 30, 40 miles, that they can tell you what to do in that area.
Right. They may tell you that they don't want any human activity because it will somehow foul some nest for some, a prairie rooster or mountain goat. We're in perilous times. Thank you much for the call. And yet we're going along with it. People say, well, yeah, but think of the tourists. Well, we've got them already. We don't have to think any more about it. Just you can promote your own dang Craters of the Moon. That's how it works. Speaking of the federal government, while the federal government works to prohibit you from even sneezing near any of its federal lands, the federal government can pretty much do as it wants. This is from the Daily Signal today, which is a Heritage Foundation publication, and why New Mexico resorted to suing the EPA for Gold King mine spill. And the writer says a backhoe operator accidentally struck an oil pipeline in Alaska 20 years ago. 1,000 to 5,000 gallons of oil spilled into the Skagway River. The EPA had his supervisor, who was at home at the time and off duty, criminally prosecuted for negligent discharge under the Clean Water Act. He did 6 months in prison, 6 months in a halfway house, and then he had supervised release and a fine. A second backhoe operator, the writer says, accidentally struck open the flooded Gold King mine of Colorado last year, and 3 million gallons of yellow water laced with mercury, lead, and other toxic heavy metals spilled into the Animas River, a regional source of water for drinking and irrigation. The EPA worked to contain the spill, but it held no one accountable. Guess which backhoe operator worked for the EPA? The second one, of course. We have a caller with us. You're next on KLIX.
Yeah, good morning, Bill. Rephrase your question a little bit that you asked a while ago. It would be better to say, how much more land are the people going to allow the federal government to take?
Well, here you go. People begging the federal government to come in and run Craters of the Moon. You simply have to tell them to go away. I mean, it's not even so much saying no. It's the fact that they're inviting them in.
You're absolutely right about Caesar's coin. I don't understand why the people can't understand that. Every time they get involved there, the federal government comes in and just runs them over.
Yeah, and we could have another 4 to 8 years of that. I thank you very much for the telephone call, 736-0300. That is 736-0300. President Obama is not only considering seizing all of that land in Oregon, he's also considering a seizure somewhere near right now, the federal government runs the Grand Canyon in Arizona, but the federal government now believes it has to have a few more million acres surrounding it. Why? It's all dust and rock. I mean, think about it. It's nothing but dust and rock, but the federal government wants to come in and again, keep people away from this site. Oh, you might harm it, and some of the pebbles might fall down the sides. Well, that happens already. It's called erosion. It's a natural process. Any canyon like that, the walls begin to eventually, it's like erosion along a beach. It happens because you have wave action. Here you got to deal with weather and occasionally rain and wind. These things come in and they have that impact. But the federal government is looking essentially to remove people from the land. You know what it's akin to is back in the 16 and 1700s, especially in places like Ireland and Scotland, where the wealthy English snobbish lords who thought that they were better than everyone else, when they wanted to get somebody's land, they just simply packed them on a boat and shipped them to Australia or to the Americas or to the Caribbean and just dumped them and got rid of them, then went in and took over the land and grazed sheep on it. And you've got the same elitists who are trying the same stunts here. You're up next. You're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.
Thanks, Bill. I do agree. I don't think we need another national park, just like I didn't think we needed the White Clouds wilderness area. And the BLM is already running the Craters of the Moon. And my understanding is the biggest difference between a national park and a monument is, at least in the monument, they allow grazing and hunting in certain areas. They don't allow it everywhere. But that would be my concern of losing that privilege.
And the other part of this, and you just brought up a project that last year got ramrodded through, is you've got members of the House and Senate who like to see their name across news releases saying, oh, look at this wonderful thing they've done, vote for me. And it's nothing more than that. They get to go stand out there, get their picture taken with the franking privileges. I thank him for the call. With the franking privileges these people have, that means the free mailing they get at your expense. Then they mail that out and say, gee, look at the great things I did. I just took more of your land. Vote for me. And isn't this wonderful? And what they really like is the fact that over at the Idaho Statesman and places like that, an editorial writer will say, oh, it was the right thing to do because humanity, of course, is a disease and needs to be wiped away so that we can preserve Mother Earth. We'll squeeze one more caller in. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley.
Hey, good morning, Bill. When Kelly was on, we was discussing the World Heritage, and I don't hear anything about that anymore, that they own the national parks. And Craters of the Moon, I think, is included in that.
Well, World Heritage, and thank you for the call. We had a caller the other day who referenced World Heritage and how it got involved with the EPA back in the early 1970s with the creation of that by Republican President Richard Nixon. And unfortunately, these people, Eric Erickson from the radio announcer who's opposed to Donald Trump but leads the Never Trump group, keeps saying that Agenda 21 is just nothing but exaggerated fear. Look, I don't necessarily believe that everyone out there is looking to come grab us, put us into internment camps, and sterilize us. But on the other hand, you have a lot of people out there who think they're right, and they think that they're well-meaning. But unfortunately, what they're trying to do to us is we've got to let them know enough is enough. And I have about the same cranial capacity they do. I can make my own decisions. And if they think that I'm evil and I can't, that must be because they look in the mirror and see evil and that they can't do it themselves either. Tony, it runs completely counter to the notions of the founders of this country. We've got more on the way. More of your telephone calls, too. Short break, though, first at 8:20. Our friend Dr. Eric F. Jones left me a message the other day saying that after his appearance with us last Friday talking about his holistic approach to health, that he was inundated with telephone calls. He is looking for new patients, and he has weeknight and sometimes Saturday appointments available. You can reach him by dialing 208-731-718. He's been in practice now, 23 years. He has a master's and doctorate degree in marriage and family therapy. He uses methods of alternative healing, naturopathy, medicinal herbs, nutrition, sound waves, intellectual cognitive self-regulation, and napathy. These help remedy and manage mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual challenges. And he just talked about what, sometimes it's just simple change in your diet, what you're eating, will greatly improve not just your physical health, but your mental health as well, your mood. And he now has a Facebook page up. It is Eric F. Jones, Ph.D., mental health and wellness therapist, and he spells Eric E-R-I-C. That's Eric with a C. Anyway, I thought I'd mention that this morning, too, because he's been quite pleased by the response from folks, especially those who tuned in and heard our conversation with him last Friday morning, talking about government and government, its overreach. Your servants at work for you, right? That's, in other words, hey, we need a pay raise. Give us more of your money so we can continue to step all over your face. That's a reference to paraphrasing at the end of the novel 1984. This comes from the Daily Signal, which I frequently reference in the program. I get a daily email from the Daily Signal 6 days a week. And I've got to tell you, it is a great government watchdog organization. And at least we still have some liberties in this country, a handful left, and it allows these people to do all of the digging that they do. On September 16, 2011, now I referenced this story yesterday because there was some testimony in Congress before the day was out yesterday. A family, their name is the Taylors. He is Calvin Taylor. He and his wife Deborah operate a farm. They have dairy cattle and they produce a lot of cream as well. They learned that thousands of dollars of their business disappeared 5 years ago in an instance. On that day, Taylor told the House Ways and Means Committee subcommittee on oversight and testimony, IRS agents knocked on the couple's farmhouse door and asked to speak with Taylor about his banking transactions. They would go to these farmers markets and they would sell heavy cream and milk, very popular with a lot of people, city folks especially, who are looking for, in many cases, they want something that's closer to the farm. They've begun to understand in the big cities that it's not all grown in the back room in the grocery store. Well, the agents said they didn't think the Taylors had done anything wrong, but the conversation shifted from discussions about a change in their business's name on its checking account to a pattern of cash deposits the Taylors made at the bank. The agents, Taylor told lawmakers yesterday, wanted to know why so many of his transactions had totaled just under $10,000. And Taylor had a simple explanation. He told them it was common knowledge that any cash deposits of more than $10,000 meant that the bank had to file a form with the government. So he was trying to save the bank some time. And they would come away from these farmers markets with thousands of dollars in cash. That's how you're doing your business. People are paying in cash, mainly at these farmers markets. They would go to the bank and they'd make deposits, but deposits under $10,000. Now, according to the statutes that were put in place back during the bad old days of the crack epidemic in this country in the late 1980s and early 1990s, that must mean that you are presumed guilty before proven innocent. In other words, they label you a drug dealer because drug dealers were tending to do things that way as well. Structuring, as it's called, is a crime. You think about that. This is the land of liberty. And if you make a series of banking deposits at $9,500 over a period of time, they will come and they will haul you off to the dock, and they will also end up seizing your money, which is what they did. And the Taylors were unable to recoup most of what was taken away from them. Initially, the IRS stepped in, grabbed $60,000, and they were only ever able to recover about half of that. The IRS said, well, we needed it for our fees and our work, etc. Do you know that in many parts of the country this is being done? And the money is just simply being used to refurbish government offices. So what this law has created, you've got, and I hate to say it, in many parts of the country, in some small communities, you've got local policing agencies that are going out and they're simply doing this to use someone's vehicles. They seize the vehicles and they put those to work because, that way they don't have to go down to the courthouse and ask someone on the county government, on the county board, to actually come out with some money and raise taxes so they can buy new vehicles. So they just simply do it that way. And it doesn't matter whether you're guilty or innocent. It's just they can do it. And they're grabbing cash and they're renovating their offices and the like with all of this. Why is this happening in the United States of America? I think these are serious questions. Right now, it looks as if Congress is going to be turning around and finally correcting this injustice, which is nearly 30 years old. But they're not going to do it overnight. That's the other part of it. It's so obviously wrong. Well, we need to have a few more hearings. And come election day, if they haven't passed any law that repeals this, and we get past election day, don't expect it anytime soon because too many people in government are benefiting from taking your money. They're nothing but parasites, bloodsuckers, vampires. 29 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. It's 53. I do highly recommend you sign up for the daily emails from the Daily Signal. Fairly easy to do. Go to the website for the Daily Signal. Check that out, and there should be a little function there. You give them your email address. I get about half a dozen of these stories every morning, and I'll tell you what, even if you're a liberal and you start reading these things, of course you probably won't because you don't want someone destroying your worldview, but if you start reading these things, you won't be a big government liberal for very long. It's 8:30, 54. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. I got more on this government abuse coming up in just a moment. I do want to note, and we've this question's come up before. We do not have this civil asset forfeiture, as it's called, in Idaho. Now, the federal government may use it from time to time, and several states have it, but it is not on the books, the state books in Idaho. So at least we can. I want to make that clear that nobody in any local police department is coming out to seize your 4x4 to take it off and repaint it and use it in a parade or whatever. Some places in Oklahoma and other states, this has become such a critical matter that the state governments have had to intervene and get in the way and block it from happening. It's 8:34. Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And I do want to remind you that if you're listening to the show, I thank you this morning, but you need to make sure that you can keep listening to the show by getting your hearing checked. If you're like most people, you're used to thinking of hearing as something that happens in your ears. In fact, it's what's between your ears that counts. The brain is where sound becomes details, really, details of your life. Your brain has to work hard to make this happen. When the sound signals from your ears are compromised, your brain has to work even harder to fill in the gaps. And that extra effort can take its toll. Don't let your brain down. Take care of your hearing with the help of Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert. Call the office today, 208-312-0957. That number is 208-312-0957. 8:35 now. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Telephone number 736-0300, and you're on the air.
Good morning, Bill. Yeah, our whole system's set up where you're presumed innocent and until you're found guilty. Well, with all the bureaus, and it's not just the IRS, EPA, BLM, look at the situation in Oregon. I mean, these people are presumed guilty, and then you have to prove your innocence. Or if you put a pond on your own place, they come out and you've gotten all the permits, a guy in southwest Wyoming. And it's not just that, but look what's happening with our justice system. The president, Trayvon Martin, the president came out, all of a sudden he's guilty. Before trials ever, he was tried by the media. In two other situations, he was proven wrong. These people are innocent under a court of law. I mean, it's going on with our Justice Department. This is just ridiculous, and we're losing our country because we're not going back to what made this country great, meaning we're innocent until proven guilty. But as long as these bureaus get the money in the way they do it, like you're talking about, it's going to keep happening, and as long as the money comes in, they're going to eat out our substance.
And there's another side to this. You may be aware of it, too. I think we observe it a lot. When it comes to Trayvon Martin or Ferguson, Missouri, you have trial by media, and media now gangs up with the folks on the American left to try to convince the public that these people should be hanging long before we even know the details.
Absolutely. Look at the Baltimore situation. I mean, unfortunately, the guy picked out got a judge, but it could have gone the other way too, So, but when you get the real facts out there, they don't really care about the facts. Look at Black Lives Matter. I mean, those people just go out. They come out and said, "Let's kill Trump," and you kill cops or pigs, and they get away with that. I mean, that would be inciting a riot, and that should be against the law. But they seem to just keep on going.
Yeah, and I thank you much for the telephone call. Speaking of Black Lives Matter, he leads me into something I wanted to mention, at least coming up in one of the next segments of the program. Bill O'Reilly on the O'Reilly Factor last night, explaining that Black Lives Matter is actually costing lives.
In Chicago, for example, this year alone, shootings up around 80%. Why? Because the Chicago police have stopped stopping suspicious people. So-called pedestrian stops are down 90% in the Windy City. When you fail to police proactively, people commit more crimes. The media will not spotlight that much of the violent crime in America is being committed right now by young black men. In fact, black males between the ages of 14 and 17 commit homicide at a rate 10 times higher than white and Hispanic male teenagers combined. And blacks of all ages commit homicide at a rate 8 times higher than whites and Hispanics combined.
Why, that raises bigot. How dare he cite facts and figures? 8:38, you're up next. We got about a minute before the break.
Yeah, Bill, that the last caller hit on it. I think this political correctness and everything else has removed the blinders off of Lady Justice. We need to put them back on. It doesn't matter how much money you make, the color of your skin, or anything else. The law is the law. It's just like I was watching this morning of that Trump rally thing, and people out there hurling insults and vulgar language along the people that were coming out. And then they started into a chant that remove your hate from my face, which seemed kind of counterproductive because the hate people were the one chanting it.
All I can tell you is I've got a little clip coming up a little later in the show. Thank you for the call. I'm going to share with you, and it's from one of the demonstrators in Albuquerque the other night when she was questioned by one of the fellow travelers from MSDNC as to why they had to riot. She said it's because the Trump supporters told them to go get jobs. I kid you not. You've got to listen to this broad. And she's wearing a T-shirt that says anarchy. It is priceless. More on that coming up a bit later in the show. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310. KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 20 minutes now from 9 o'clock. It makes you, people out there who still haven't figured out why we're having such an unusual political season, at least at the national level. Things have quieted down a lot. And I knew this last night when I was at the local Republican committee meeting. It does not look like Idaho is quite the hotbed it was a couple of years ago or 4 years ago or 6 years ago. Most of the focus is now on the national level because I think that's where people realize the biggest dysfunction is, and that is because it's the size of the government it's so unwieldy now that no one can keep an eye on it, and you've got all of these rogue elements, the EPA and Department of Education, and they're all running around the IRS doing exactly what they want. And there's no serious oversight any longer. This is all bluster, too, when they talk about impeaching the IRS director. First of all, his predecessor, she got off scot-free. Well, I don't know that she was actually running the entire operation, but these people, and Koskinen is just incompetent. I don't know that he was necessarily mean. I just don't think you watch the testimony with this guy about all of the way they use his department as a cudgel, and it's almost as if he seems lost. These departments are so big, even the people who are put in charge of them don't know what's going on. 8:45, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We are looking forward, at least for the moment, the weather forecast says we are looking forward to a tremendous weekend, Memorial Day weekend, finally getting some warmer temperatures too. And that means summer is right around the corner, and you may need to repair or perhaps just have a little service done on your air conditioning unit. You should call the professionals at Ramsey Heating and Electric. Make sure the job is done right for the first time and set yourself up for a great summer. You can see them at 2600 Overland Avenue in Burley, or you can give them a telephone call, 678-0459. Ramsey Heating and Electric, where they sell warm winters and cool summers. That's at Ramsey Heating and Electric. I've got to mention again, it's in Burley. 8:46 now. And if you're looking to reach our program today, 736-0300. That's 736-0300. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. You're on the air.
Why don't we talk about the elephant in the room, what happened in Detroit? I mean, yelling racist things and doing sickening things to this poor young black man. And also his sister's also getting arrested yesterday because they filed a lawsuit. I mean, why don't we talk about that? I mean,
here's a thought. Let me make you an offer. You need to get your own show, although it'll have to be on one of these stations that's based on another language because you can't speak English. But, you can do that anytime you like. It's always deflection with these liberals, too. Yeah, well, what about? Well, okay, my guys are scurvy criminals, but you know what happened over here? Pay no attention to the criminals on my side. Please, ignore that. But on the other hand, if you can't speak English and you'd like to talk about it, I'm sure that the Magic Valley has grown to the point. I mean, we have so many people here now who are illegally here that you could find an audience for foreign language talk. So be my guest, Go talk to somebody in the business somewhere else. 8:47, 54 right now. Bill Colley with you on Top Story, and you're on the air.
Yeah, about the state confiscating property. I've had my pickup confiscated twice. Once last time by Twin Falls County, and it takes you 6 months before you get before a judge, and it's a pretty nice pickup. So you talk to a lawyer, he wants almost as much as what the pickup's worth, and then 6 months later, both times I got my pickup back, but My pickup's been gone for over a year.
Well, let's back up. Why was it confiscated?
My boy was driving it, and he had some marijuana on him, but it was my pickup, and so he got caught for that. But they took my pickup.
Well, I hate to say it. The simplest way to avoid all of that is not to have marijuana in the pickup.
The simplest way is not to. I lost the use of my truck for a year, and I went for a judge twice, and both times I got it back. So who's in the right and who's in the wrong?
Well, I guess you'd have to ask your son about some of that too. I thank you much for the call. I'm sorry to hear that you lost use of it. And it is true that, and I've had it explained this way by Grant Lobes, that will happen if they will seize that vehicle if someone is found with drugs in the vehicle. And yes, you do have to go through that procedure. And, we can't, no matter how hard we try to raise our kids the right way, sometimes they do bad things. Or they don't necessarily have their head on straight some days, just like the rest of us. But on the other hand, if nobody is pulled over if there had been no marijuana in the dang truck, you'd have it. You wouldn't have had to go through all the hoops. Can I at least say that? Crying out loud, folks. Straighten up and fly right. 849. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 55. All right, he had dope in the car, but other than that, I can't understand what the problem was. 10 minutes now away from 9 o'clock. Talking about how government is failing us on so many levels and why people are so frustrated with it. I saw a piece last week where a writer said, it was Peggy Noonan, the former Reagan speechwriter. She said, people want government to be accountable. By the way, if we had marijuana legalized in this country, I guess you wouldn't have the pickup truck seized. But on the other hand, what we're seeing happen in places where they've had marijuana legalized, Washington State and Colorado, they've had a huge uptick in the number of people who've been killed by stoned drivers. Just a point there that perhaps it's not all it's cracked up to be when it comes to, it's a minor little nuisance drug, and that's, no. Look, I know people take Benadryl and shouldn't drive, and they've been in accidents too, but the idea is the same. It's your responsibility, especially when you're on the road. And if you're letting your child use the vehicle, perhaps tell your child, I'm sorry I'm spending way too much time on this, but the more I think about it, if your child is going to use your vehicle, tell them not to smoke the dope. Leave it at home. Leave it at your buddy's house. Go out in the woods, whatever else, but please don't have it in my vehicle. And my dad solved these problems. First of all, he didn't really have to worry about us being out in the drug culture or anything like that. But, he solved the problem. Dad, I want to borrow the car. No. Dad, I want to borrow the van. No. Dad, I want to borrow the truck. No. Well, how am I going to? You can either ride your bicycle or number two, you can go get a job, earn some money, and buy your own dang truck. Guess which one I had to do? It was the latter. Funny thing how that happens to work. I never, ever got to drive any of my dad's vehicles until I was in my 30s. And I had to go pick him up at a hospital one time after he had open heart surgery done. He had a quadruple bypass. And his car, the way his car was built, it was more comfortable than mine. So I ended up driving his car, and my uncle and I went along, and we picked him up, and we took him home. And I was about 30 at the time. So okay, so can we get back to my other topic? My son was higher than a kite, which was okay with me, and this dang government, Wall Street Journal, I mentioned Peggy Noonan. She writes for them, and she said that the American people want a government that's accountable. I understand that. I do too, right? We all do. We want to make sure. We all realize we have to pay some taxes. You don't want potholes in the road. You want snow plows when it snows heavily on the road. When there's a fire, you want a fire department coming by, and these things don't happen for free. Maybe in Bernie Sanders' world they do. But here's some things that people are really miffed about. Also, fellow columnist at the Wall Street Journal, Daniel Henninger. In New York City, he says, because he's talking about this guy from the VA who's not going to resign his job, but he said that, these guys dying, waiting to get treatment at VA hospitals, it's no different than waiting at Disneyland. Disneyland was fuming, by the way. Disneyland came out and said, yeah, we may have long waits, but we've added extra attractions along the lines to keep people entertained, and nobody's dying. So Henninger's writing about this, and he says, in New York City, you can see people standing in Disney-sized lines to buy a cupcake. But there was no partisan slant recently to the Disney-like lines at the nation's airports. So, it's not just the VA, it's the TSA working at airports. Or how about this? The IRS Taxpayer Advocate's 2015 report says that of all calls routed to the tax agency's customer service representatives, the IRS answered only about 38% of its calls, meaning that 62%, that would be two-thirds of the people who called the IRS problem hotline, did not get through. What happens to them? Well, I guess they get slapped in leg irons and they get hauled off to federal prison because they couldn't get through on the telephone. The average hold time is more than 30 minutes, and the experience waiting for you isn't a cupcake, he writes. I have been dealing with this. I had to call a government office. I have a corporation of my own, and I had to call a government office the other day because every year in June I get hit with an incorporation fee repeatedly. And even though the corporation has been dormant now for at least over a year, I want to keep it alive because you never know when I might have need for it again. So I had to get on the telephone the other day and call out of state where I'm incorporated, and then you sit in the background, and then every once in a while a recorded voice comes out and says, "Your call is important to us. Please remain waiting." Oh, thank you so much. Warms your heart, doesn't it? The writer goes on to say, for more detail on federal sludge, we recommend reading 10,000 Commandments by a writer named Wayne Cruz. He's from something called CEI, that is Competitive Enterprise Institute. By his count, some 3,300 new federal rules are standing in their own special lines. Under the Obama White House alone, we've had 20,000 new federal regulations. How can you even track those? How can lawyers even track those? These are things people cannot keep up with. There's a joke that was shared with me one time by a prosecutor in a county out of state years ago, and he said, look, you get up in the morning, and as soon as you get in that car and drive to work, he said, and by the time you drive home at the end of the day, he said, there's probably 30 or 40 different things we could actually arrest you for and indict you for that you've done during the day. Isn't that a frightening thought? And that includes little old ladies going to church on Sundays. So I was looking through this morning, and I think it explains a lot about the direction the country is going and why we happen to be where we're at, and explains the rise of people like Donald Trump. Americans are just simply fed up. Meanwhile, Trump is dealing with all of these rioters, and they're trying to rationalize why they're out there waving Mexican flags and burning clothes and throwing fire at police officers and injuring police officers. MSDNC caught up with one of these dumber than a box of rocks protesters a few days ago in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She's wearing a T-shirt that says anarchy, and she's explaining they had to riot because as they were standing along the rope line and Trump supporters were going into the Trump rally, Trump supporters said, "Why don't you go and get a job?" And that was something that they just couldn't let get by, so they had to then tear apart the city, loot stores, smash windows, and the like.
Well, I just gave them two up their hugs because the message they're trying to get across is right, where people, let's love each other. That was the whole beginning of the protest. There's families out there. We're having fun. It was stop Trump's hate with love. And then once the Trump supporters are coming in, and you see a Trump supporter,
Go ahead. I know we've got a lot of.
You're useless. Go to school, get a job. And I went there with my brother and 4 of my friends who worked 40 hours a week while going to school. And this is the idea they have of us because they're fed this idea by Trump. And I'm saying them because, in my opinion, Trump is a powerful, rich, sociopathic person, and it's easy for him to use his their fears to manipulate them.
I have to point out, you're wearing, obviously an anarchy shirt, and critics have said, hey, these protesters are coming out here only to disrupt and not to get a message across. How do you respond to that criticism? Did you come out here to disrupt? Do you have that message?
No. The only reason I'm out here right now is because I didn't even know this was going on. I left to pick up my mom, who works 12 hours at the hospital, and my family is the type of family that Bernie promises to, help.
So you're a Bernie Sanders supporter?
Yes.
Of course she is. And by the way, have you checked out my new purse? I got it while I was looting that store across the street a few minutes ago. Bernie says he's going to make sure I get a new purse every week, and you'll pay for it. And I don't even know why I'm here. I went to pick up my mother. She's working 12 hours a day, and I just decided, well, heck, I'm going to riot. 8:57. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. Now, my church does not approve of sterilization, but I do understand those people out there who feel it might be a necessity at some point to save this culture. And you just were listening to one of those arguments they make. News from Fox is on the way in just a moment. We have one more hour of Bill Colley on Top Story coming up on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. We'll give you some Trumpian response to all of this in a few minutes. It just gets better and better, doesn't it? And Lefty out there doesn't seem to realize that we're in a pre-revolutionary mode in this country, or pre-Civil War mode. Lefty apparently just feels he's going to continue to insist that he has to pee next to your little girl, and you're not going to do anything about it. Details on the way.